My name is Nora Blake, 32 years old, financial coordinator at a community hospital in Seattle. Most days I deal with spreadsheets, insurance claims, and people who never see the person behind the paperwork. Tonight, there's a letter on my kitchen table. It's paper thin and cheap, the kind you find in care homes. The handwriting is shaky, uneven, and the name on the envelope stops my breath, Martin Blake. My father. The man who once said I was no longer his daughter. I read the first line aloud just to hear how it sounds in the air. If you have any decency left, you'll come see me before I die. The words sit heavy between my heartbeat and the rain tapping the window. Amber called earlier. Her voice clipped and distant, telling me he's fading, that he keeps asking for me though he barely remembers her. I told her I'd think about it, but we both knew I already had. I stare at the letter again and whisper, "Now you want to see me?" The city outside hums, neon washing over the wet glass, and in it I see the ghost of who I was the night he threw me out. My throat tightens, the same way it did 13 years ago when thunder drowned out my name. Some echoes never fade, they just change frequency until you mistake them for silence. Funny how every storm in Seattle still sounds like that night. The same low growl across the bay, the same wind clawing at the eaves. I trace the edge of the envelope with my thumb and almost laugh. Life has a way of returning its debts. And when it does, it sends the bill in the rain. When I was 16, I came home from the corner store with a soda in one hand and algebra notes in the other. My father stood in the middle of the living room like a storm about to break. Eyes red, fists clenched. "You've been stealing from me," he shouted, shaking a wad of cash and a bottle of painkillers. I froze, the words catching in my throat as Amber appeared behind him with that practiced tremor in her voice, saying she'd found the evidence and couldn't hide it anymore. I told him, "Those aren't mine. Dad, you know I wouldn't touch your wallet." He didn't even blink, just slammed his hand on the table and said, "I raised a thief under my own roof." Amber wiped a tear and whispered, "I tried to help her, but she won't stop." My father's voice cut through the air. "Enough! I won't have a drug addict in my house." Oh. I begged him to look at the labels, to check the dates, to ask the pharmacist. Anything that might make him see reason. He didn't. He looked at me like I was a stranger who'd just broken into his home. "You think I'm blind? You think I don't see what you've become?" he said, grabbing my arm so tight I felt the bruise bloom beneath his fingers. Amber stepped closer, her face full of pity that didn't reach her eyes. He shoved the cash and bottles into a plastic bag and threw it at my feet. "Pack your things and get out," I said. "Where am I supposed to go?" And he barked. "Anywhere but here," Amber whispered. "Dad, maybe let her stay one night." And he snarled, "No." She made her choice. The words hit harder than the rain slamming against the windows. I picked up my backpack, the same one I used for school, and looked at them both. "You're making a mistake," I said. But no one answered. My father opened the door. Wind howling through the frame, rain slicing the air between us. "Get out of my house," he said again. Quieter this time, almost gentle, like he'd already buried me. When the door shut behind me, the storm outside wasn't half as cold as the one inside me. I woke up to the sound of machines and a woman's voice saying, "You're safe now, sweetheart." Her name was Gloria Ramirez, a retired social worker who had found me collapsed on the roadside. When she asked what happened, I whispered, "My family decided I didn't exist." She nodded like she'd heard every version of that sentence before and said softly, "Then we'll make them see you again." Ezeret. Hours later, Helen Cartwright stormed into the hospital room with the kind of fury that comes from love, not anger. "Where's my granddaughter?" she demanded, her voice shaking the walls more than any thunder. When my father walked in behind a police officer, she turned on him like a blade. "You threw a child into a storm," she said. "Don't you dare call yourself her father." "I canned," he muttered. "You don't understand. Helen. She stole from me." But Gloria cut in. "Mr. Blake, the officers already searched the house. Nothing links her to what you're accusing." He stared at her as if logic was an insult. Amber stood beside him, crocodile tears glistening, whispering, "We only wanted to help her." Helen's glare shut her down. "You wanted to bury her," she said. "But she's still standing." The police filed their reports, and Child Protective Services took over. Gloria explained the process to me with steady calm, saying, "You'll stay with your grandmother for now. Nora, the court will review your father's custody." I asked, "Will he ever believe me?" And she replied, "He doesn't have to. The truth doesn't need permission to exist." Her words landed like something heavier than comfort, closer to prophecy. That night at Helen's house, she sat across the table, her coffee steaming between us. "You're home now," she said, not smiling, just certain. I wanted to ask if home could still be a place after it's thrown you out. But instead I said, "What happens next?" She leaned back and answered, "We fight with facts, not feelings." The way she said it made me believe we could. Before going to bed, Gloria touched my shoulder and whispered, "They thought they buried you." I looked up, unsure what to say. Her eyes softened, fierce and kind all at once. "They didn't know you were a seed," she said. And for the first time, I believed I might grow again. Justice doesn't knock, it builds a case. That's what Gloria told me when the investigation began. Her voice steady as she sifted through reports. Richard O'Donnell joined us, a family attorney who owed Helen a favor. And he said, "If they built lies, we'll build evidence." I sat across from him, my hands still trembling, and whispered, "They won't get away with this, right?" He looked at me and answered, "Not if we keep receipts." The first one came from the bank. Gloria called me late one afternoon and said, "We pulled the ATM footage. The withdrawal happened at 2:47 p.m. And you were in school." I asked, "Who was it?" But I already knew. She said, "Amber, clear as daylight. Same jacket. Same car." I pressed my palm against my chest and said quietly, "She didn't just lie. She rehearsed it." Next came the pharmacy records. Richard laid them on the table, his finger tracing the prescription code. "These pills belong to Ryan Keller," he said. "He filed a theft report 3 days after you were kicked out." I frowned. "So they planted them first, then called the cops to cover their tracks?" Richard nodded. "Classic misdirection. They forgot the timeline has teeth." I almost smiled at that. We found the burner phone next. A convenience store 2 blocks from Amber's gym had footage of her buying it. Helen watched the screen and said, "She even used her own car. Some mastermind." Gloria leaned back and murmured, "Arrogance always leaves a paper trail." I stared at the blurry image of my sister and said, "She thought she was untouchable." The truth, when it finally showed itself, looked nothing like revenge, just a quiet correction of balance. Helen wanted confrontation. "I'll handle her," she said, calling Amber over for coffee. I sat in the kitchen, listening from the next room. Helen's voice was ice. "You planned this like a crime scene." Amber laughed softly. "You think she's some angel. She's weak. Just like her mother." Helen answered, "Weakness is still kinder than your brand of cruelty." I heard the silence that followed and knew something inside Amber cracked. Martin started asking questions after that. He came to Helen's house one evening, his face gray. "I just want to understand," he said. Helen folded her arms. "Understand what? That you threw your daughter away because the liar cried first?" He turned to me and said, "I believed her because she looked sure." I looked him in the eye and replied, "So did the jury in every wrongful conviction." Weiss. A week later, Gloria called again. "Ryan Keller's been arrested in California. Investment fraud. He's talking." I felt my stomach twist. "About what?" she said. "About everything, your sister. The plan. The pills. The money. He's cutting a deal." I whispered. "Then it's over." Gloria paused. "Not yet. Truth takes its time." I understood she was right. At the hearing, Amber tried to wear innocence like perfume. The prosecutor showed the ATM photo, the bank logs, the convenience store tape, the signed confession from Ryan. "Is this you, Ms. Blake?" they asked. She said, "I was getting groceries." The room went still. $800 in cash? Someone asked. And she had no answer. Her silence was the sound of a door closing. When it ended, I walked past her without stopping. She said under her breath, "You wanted my life." I turned just enough to meet her eyes. "No," I said. "I just wanted mine back." The truth didn't roar that day. It settled quietly, like dust after a storm. Justice had built its case, brick by brick, and all I had to do was stand there while it held. The verdict came down like a quiet hammer. Amber lost her license, her job, and the last thread of credibility she'd been clinging to. Martin was stripped of custody and ordered to fund my education and therapy until I turned 21. When the judge finished reading, I realized justice didn't sound like thunder. It sounded like paperwork being stamped. Outside the courthouse, Helen walked beside me, her pace firm and unhurried. Martin tried to follow, saying, "Nora, please, just let me explain." Helen turned first. "Explain what?" she said. "That you believed a liar over your own blood?" He looked at me then, eyes hollow, and whispered, "I made a mistake." I answered, "No. Dad, you made a choice." I notice. Amber waited by the steps, her expression brittle. "You think you've won?" she asked, her voice sharp but shaking. "You ruined everything." I said, "No. You did that yourself." She laughed, a sound more like breaking glass. "You'll always be the victim," she said. And I told her, "Only in your version of the story." Her silence felt heavier than any sentence. Reporters called it a family tragedy, but I called it balance. The money she'd stolen had to be repaid in full. The $18,000 to my father and the $800 she'd planted in my dresser. She'd served probation, community service, and 5 years under supervision. Every word of the court record was another brick sealing the life she'd tried to build on lies. When it was finally over, Martin stood at the bottom of the steps, looking smaller than I remembered. "I don't know how to fix this," he said. Helen didn't even slow down. "You can't," she told him. "You just stop making it worse." He tried again, his voice breaking. "She's still my daughter," Helen said. "You should have remembered that before you threw her away." I walked past them both and didn't look back. That night, I sat in Helen's kitchen, the verdict still echoing in my mind. She poured coffee and said, "It's done now." I asked, "Does it ever feel done?" And she answered, "No, but at least it feels fair." The air felt lighter somehow. Not from victory, but from release. For the first time, I believed the storm had finally spent itself. 15 years later, I found myself staring at another envelope with my father's name on it. The paper was thin, the handwriting slower than I remembered. Helen said over the phone. It came from Maple Grove, some care home near Tacoma. I told her. He's still alive. And she answered, alive isn't the same as living. The letter sat in front of me for hours before I opened it. Inside, his words stumbled across the page. I know I don't deserve it. He'd written, but I need to see you before I go. I read it twice. Then called Caleb, the man I was going to marry. He wants to apologize. I said. Caleb asked, will you go? And I told him, I'm not sure if it's for him or for me. He said quietly, maybe it doesn't matter which. When I walked into Maple Grove, the air smelled like bleach and endings. Martin looked smaller, folded into the hospital bed, his skin paper-thin. He saw me and started to cry. The sound fragile, like a man breaking under his own breath. I think about that night every day. He said, I threw away my child. I stood still and answered, you didn't just throw me away. You built a life on pretending I was gone. Axe. He tried to reach for my hand. I was blind. He said, I believed what was easiest. I told him, you didn't believe her because she was convincing. You believed her because she made you feel good. His eyes filled with regret. I lost everything that mattered. He whispered, and I can't undo it. I said, I'm not here to punish you. I just needed to see what guilt looks like when it finally stops running. Oh. He nodded slowly, tears tracking down his face. Do you forgive me? He asked. Voice breaking like old wood. I said, yes, but not for you. Forgiveness is how I stop carrying you. The silence after that was almost gentle. He closed his eyes and whispered, thank you for coming. I sat there a few more minutes, long enough to feel the weight shift inside me, like something heavy setting down. As I left, a nurse stopped me in the hall. You're his younger daughter, right? She asked. I nodded. And she said, your sister came last week. He refused to see her. I didn't respond. She added, he told us he couldn't look at her face anymore. I walked outside. The sky overcast but calm. The rain had started again. Soft. Steady. Familiar. Driving back to Seattle, I watched the water streak across the windshield and thought of Helen waiting with coffee on the table, probably pretending not to worry. Caleb texted, asking, how did it go? And I typed back, I think I'm done. The words looked small on the screen, but they felt enormous. For years, I'd been defined by a storm. Now, the weather had finally changed. Some storms don't destroy you, they rebuild you. 15 years after the night I lost everything. I live in a quiet house near the harbor. Sunlight spilling across walls I chose myself. Helen still calls every morning, just to make sure I'm eating breakfast. And Caleb says the way I breathe when it rains sounds like peace. The life I built isn't perfect, but it's mine. And that's enough. Thank you for listening to my story. If it moved you, please subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me where you're watching from. Your voice keeps mine alive.